The reality is government is the world's second oldest profession after prostitution. So as soon as people started being people, they started ruling themselves and having government.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Hey there. Welcome to The New Rules with Pentz, where we help you navigate today's chaos with precision. Your host, Pentz, has 25 years of experience working in business and government, and he knows how the old rules have fallen apart. Each episode, we'll explore how to thrive in this new landscape by mastering the new rules while everyone else is still figuring them out. Let's dive in.
All right, we are back. Tanya is joining me again from San Cugat. So what are we talking about today? Government efficiency?
Yes. Is that an oxymoron?
Well, I've been thinking about this, and I kind of have the sense that like the finance and tech bros are having their BLM moment. So like when George Floyd was killed, there's this massive BLM movement. All of a sudden it seemed like everything was, defund the police, and you couldn't, celebrate 4th of July and all this stuff. And now it's like these finance and tech bros feel totally validated by Trump's win, and they're off like talking about taking a hatchet to the government and all these different things. So I've been trying to put this in a context, right? So I want to talk about a couple of different things that I actually didn't address in the article that I probably should have. But the first is sort of the history of this, right? This whole idea. And then the second is sort of what does government efficiency actually mean? So on the history, like this is not a new ballgame. I think Reagan was the first one who was like, hey, we're cutting back. We're going to, roll back the Great Society and the New Deal, right? And government just grew. And, they did, I do think that under the Reagan administration, they started this approach where it was like target the federal workforce, right? So like don't grow the federal workforce. So that definitely happened. But overall government growth just continued. And then, I started working in Congress right after the Gingrich Revolution in 95, because I'm old, after we graduated from college. And again, it was like contract with America. We're going to cut all the stuff you're hearing today, that's all straight out of Gingrich's talking points. We're going to get rid of the Department of Education, Department of Energy. I don't know. Can Rick Perry even remember which department? I think he headed up energy of the first administration, and that was the one he forgot in the debate. Okay, and EPA. So
Yeah, that was a success.
Right. And they're all still here, right? So, color me a little suspicious that after 30 years or, really 40 years of this stuff, that we're going to do something at this point with a 3-seat majority in the Senate and whatever it is in the House, single-digit majority. So the other thing, and then we, after 95, we went into this various versions of what I now call the Paul Ryan budget. There were other people before that, but there's sort of there was a big commission called Erskine Bowles and Alan Simpson did, talking about tax hikes and spending cuts. That was kind of similar stuff. You had Bush administration tried to get rid of Social Security or cut it back. They actually ended up adding a bunch of money to Medicare Part B. So great record there on cutting government outlays. And then you have Paul Ryan and the Tea Party era proposing all these drastic cuts and changes. And there were a little bit of cuts in 2014, 15 through sequestration. It was really a restraint in growth. And you could say that's what led to Trump, right? Austerity was not popular. So
It never is.
Right. So to me, this history, I've just heard this so many times. And granted, Elon is a talented person. So maybe, I don't know, maybe it's different this time, but color me a little suspicious. So that's sort of the history of all this, right? And then the other thing I thought was interesting is basically this is Project 2025, right? Target federal employees, close down agencies. The Trump campaign ran about as far away from project as they could. And Doge sounds a little bit like Project 2026. I'm just wait, what? You just ran it. You specifically said, I don't want this and I don't agree with it. And now all of a sudden you have a mandate for it. So I don't know. That's confusing. And then, okay, so on the definition of government efficiency, I think this is all over the map. Like, I think people are being really careless here. So there is stuff like, how do we get government to work better? So like mechanics of government, procurement reform, things like that. I'm all for it. We desperately need it. It is hard work. Well, then I would say regulatory outside of government, because I wouldn't say that's like government operations are the problem with permitting. The problem with permitting is the lawsuits coming in from environmental groups or others, who want to manipulate the law. So like the first is government operations. So like, yes, 100%, we should do that. But that is hard work that you've got to go into committees and work on defense procurement reform and this and that. There's a lot to be done there. But it doesn't involve slashing tons of money and people. In fact, you need more people for that. So I'd say that's one category. 100% we can work on that, but that's unglamorous long-term work, which I do not see any of these people engaging in. Two is, hey.
Yeah, and who would do it? That's my question.
Yeah, it would be hard work at ONB, working with relevant committees, government reform, and others. There's probably a ton of jurisdiction on that. It's complicated. It would take, dedicated effort over a long time. I think, quite frankly, it'd be bipartisan. But it's just unglamorous work that people, you don't run on like, hey, government procurement's way better. People don't vote for that. So I think that would be awesome. I don't think they're going to do it. It tends to be, long-term, unglamorous work that people don't like. So that's one set of things, right? Which 100%, maybe there'll be some progress there. I'd love it. Second is what you're talking about, like permit and regulatory reform. That is not because government doesn't work well. It's because Congress wrote a bunch of laws, then interpreted by the bureaucracy. So fair enough, like the bureaucracy added onto these things, like NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act, and Clean Air Act, and all these different things. Same stuff that, FDA, NIH, that kind of stuff. So again, a great area I think we could make progress on, but it does require changing the law. So you're going to have to go in and amend the national environment. And that requires Congress, and you can't do that in reconciliation. We'll talk a little bit about reconciliation. It requires going to committees. Same thing with procurement, right? But I think potentially even more beneficial. And this is the one area I actually think they might do, and it would be great. Okay. Then you go into, okay, I want to cut government spending. And then the last category is I want to get rid of feds and rearrange bureaucracy, right? So let's take the last one first, actually. So, you could go eliminate a bunch of feds, but the reality is they're not that many. For the size of the government, we have 1.8 million civilian employees, another 600,000 or 700,000 who are defense civilian employees, and then you have active duty military. Take that aside, and you've got a $6 trillion budget. So okay, you could go in and eliminate some feds, but the reality is there are probably too few feds overseeing current spending to make it efficient. And I just don't think you're going to cut your way in feds. Like all that money together is just going to be a few $100 million, right? It's not going to get you to where you want.
It's going to be $2 trillion, right?
Right. So yeah, if you want to go in and say, hey, I want to change hiring authority, like I think the best thing they could do, quite frankly, is simply reinstate a meritocratic test to get employment, like they do with foreign. So they have a test you need to take, a couple of stages to show that you're qualified, right? So get rid of all these hiring incentives. But by the way, one of the most major hiring incentives is veteran preference, right? Most people probably want that, right? But it brings in people who might not be qualified at the same time, or might not be the most qualified. But quite frankly, yeah, I think you could do something there where you reinstate a meritocratic testing regime and improve the quality of the federal workforce. I would say you probably want to pay them more. So rather than like saving a bunch of money, you actually probably want to pay more and bring in better people and have looser hiring and firing authorities. Like they talk a lot about Schedule F, which it would be an attempt So it's an attempt at the end of the last Trump administration to take senior civil service policy related jobs and make them subject to sort of like a political appointment process or firing process. So like they would be able to fire these people and hire people themselves without going through the civil service requirements. And like, look, I think probably the Trump administration would use that to bring in a bunch of their cronies, and it would be corrupt and stupid. But I think, hey, look, they're the administration. They should be able to hire the people they want in senior policy jobs. So I actually don't think Schedule F's that bad. They might not use it well, but then vote them out of office because they didn't use it well, right? So I do think more flexibility for the administration to bring in people not subject to congressional advice and consent. I think that's got to stay for the top people, but there are too many Senate-approved positions as it is. You got to let the administration run itself, right? We got to give them an attempt there. But so I think on feds, I don't think you're going to be able to even if you get rid of a bunch of them, you're going to damage core operations or you're just going to get more contractors, right? Is that what you want? More federal contractors? To be honest, the best policy would be to get a meritocratic system and pay them more. So I would say that.
Did we ever have a meritocratic system?
Yeah, we did until like the 60s or something. They got rid of it. And it became like a very like paint by numbers preference type hiring system. But we did have, I don't know when the actual test was done away with, but to me, that would be a great system, right? So anyway, I think, those are where I think you can go there. I don't think you get a lot of money there. And I don't think smashing the bureaucracy. Oh, then we can talk about eliminating departments. Well, are we talking about just moving boxes around? Because like, if you want to destroy the Department of Ed and then you move all their functions to other agencies, I mean, what did you accomplish? Right? I don't understand that. So people think like moving boxes. I mean, I've seen these federal agencies over years and they always move around boxes and nothing ever changes. Like, this is useless. What are we doing here? I mean, I guess there's some, did like realigning everything for Department of Homeland Security and make Homeland Security so much better. I mean, probably not. Maybe after 10 years, 20 years. I mean, this to me is just not like some amazing panacea of like, or you could do like, all right, so then the last thing is we're going to cut funding, right? And this is where I think the finance and tech bros are totally smoking crack. I heard somebody on like one of these finance guys, like he runs some hedge fund, like, oh yeah, well, let's just get rid of that Department of Education. It's $100 billion and, maybe there's probably some special funding from some of the pandemic bills in there. But, like if you go into the actual budget of the Department of Education, you're sitting there talking about, okay, $100 billion, right? 29 billion about is Pell Grants. Okay, so you're going to take away access.
You're going to take away Pell Grants.
Yeah, to college to poor kids. Okay.
For lower income students. Okay.
I would love to see you get that through Congress and then run on it. Okay, that would be interesting. All right, or I could cut the $12.5 billion in special education funding for K through 12 schools so that kids with special needs don't have teachers. Or I could cut the 14.4 in Title I grants to, to state and local education. And then you can go as a congressman, explain to your constituents why their class sizes just doubled, right? Or you can take away student loan programs from middle-class kids who are using it to use subsidized federal loans, with better terms for going to college. Now, look, I don't agree. I think we shouldn't fund middle-class kids with direct student loan program because it probably just inflates the cost of college. But you go run on that with your congressman because the person who's getting it now is going to be pissed. And like, all right, so you can say all this brave crap about this and then, okay, everything else, research and administration and all that other stuff is like $7.9 billion. So that's what you're going to cut? And then who's going to run all these programs? Like, come on, this is a joke. I can go through agency after agency. And of course, there's stupid shit they're doing, right? But the majority of it is super important and it's stuff that people want. And like, yeah, you can put out, I mean, I've seen this since the 90s. Oh, look at this crazy NIH study they funded for like, farting bees or whatever it is, right? And it's like, yeah, but they also funded CAR T therapy, which is like the most advanced way to save people from cancer. So give me a break. You're not getting rid of the NIH. I mean, this is just insanity. These people are just crazy.
Are they giving, is Elon saying, we're going to cut the Department of or whoever, we're going to cut the Department of Education, but this is what we propose in its place. I couldn't see what that is.
I mean, I think this is the point. Like, everyone thinks there's this mystery pot of money that no one cares about, and it's a total waste. And like, we've been talking about it for 50 years and no one's identified it and got rid of it. Right. Okay. So then let's talk, and so like I said in the article, it's way easier to talk about cuts in the abstract and way harder to cut anything in reality. Right. Because everything has a constituency. It's just like, hey, you're going to take college away from poor kids? That's what you're going to do? I don't think so. I don't think you're going to get, enough votes. But, the other problem we have, so just looking, I use Department of Ed as an example of like one that everyone talks about getting rid of, right? So, but look overall, right? Like, we spend half the federal budget is Medicare and Social Security, and they're the fastest growing parts of the budget, right? So, well, they might not be the fastest growing, but certainly from a large base, they're the biggest growing, right? That's off the table, apparently. So the only part that you actually should, I don't think we should cut it. I think we should restrain the growth, like maybe raise the retirement age one more year over several years, extend out the time where people get eligible for Medicare so they have to stay on private insurance. Those are the kind of things I think we can tweak and maybe, change some of they have changed CPI as a way to keep the cost of living adjustments down for Social Security, right? So that's what you need to do to fix the budget, along with raising taxes, right? And this goes back to another article I wrote where you got to get, taxes are going to have to come up to 17.5% of GDP, maybe 18, and spending's right now it's at 16%, and spending is going to have to come down from 24% of GDP down to 20%, right? But we're not going to go to 15% of GDP on spend, right? That's just not happening. And, these people are sitting here, I don't understand the discretionary part of the budget out of the 6.1 trillion, right? Half of it is Social Security and Medicare. You've got a whole series of other things that are mandatory, right? So Medicaid, children's health insurance, transportation funding, all these kinds of things. That goes out automatically. Now you can pass a law, but, to change that, but like, okay, you're going to cut Medicaid. You're going to cut all the poor people off their health insurance all over the country. Like, I don't think states are going to love that. You could try it. Paul Ryan tried it. It never worked. But you're talking, that's like 630 billion Medicaid and CHIPS versus 848 million in Medicare. Okay. So you cut 300 billion and you double, you triple 10 times the amount of uninsured people. I don't know. I don't see people running on that, right? And then you go down and you start looking at the next part of the budget. So once you get all that mandatory stuff, plus you add in interest, you're at 70% of the budget, right, is off the table. And then the last part of it is going to be discretionary. And that's 1.8 trillion out of that 6.1. I think it's a little over half is defense, which we also said you're not going to cut. That's 13% of the budget. Now you're down to 800 billion. And you've got all those student loans and Pell Grants. You've got, disasters you got to pay for, medical research, law enforcement. I mean, food stamps. You want to get rid of food stamps. So veterans benefits. You're going to get rid of all the veterans. I mean, what are you going to cut out of that 800 billion? And you're talking about, they're talking about cutting 2 trillion. So if they're talking about cutting, and this is the lie, right? Well, here's the lie. I think they're talking about 2 trillion over 10 years. Okay. So it's 200 billion a year. That is achievable. 2 trillion a year? You are fucking smoking crack. That is not happening. You would have to gut one of these major programs or get rid of all veterans benefits, or, there's just not enough money. So I just don't understand where these people are coming from. Like, put it on the table. Like, what are you actually going to do? And everything that you could do to get that amount down has been firmly rejected multiple times at the ballot box. So even if they could do it, they are going to get slaughtered in the next election. I mean, you take away everybody's college benefits, you take away their teachers, you take away their Social Security or Medicare, or you kick tons of poor people out on the street with no medical care. Dude, I don't think you're winning any elections. Yeah.
Bad enough as is. I mean, so where did this come from? Like, whose idea was this?
There is a libertarian Cato Institute, somewhat Heritage Foundation kind of part of the party that's always wanted. I mean, really what they want to do is they want to gut the Great Society and ADL program. So they want to gut Social Security and Medicare because that's really where most of the money is and will be going forward. I mean, if you look now, the number of people who are getting transfer payments from the government is like massively increased, which is because everybody's retiring, have all these baby boomers. So they're dependent, increasing sections of our population are dependent on government transfers.
Right, but gutting Social Security is a non-starter politically.
Right. So they just keep running around making up what I think is quite frankly bullshit, saying we're going to cut this, we're going to cut that, oh, we're going to go after this. But it's all sort of abstract. And then they put it in a document like Project 2025. It's politically toxic and they have to run away from it. But there's this part of the party that really wants that, but they can't get it through. It won't happen. So it's a very weird, like it comes up all the time. And I just don't think people push back enough and say like, okay, show me the actual cuts you're going to make. And then let's run on that and see who wins. Right. And now I think there's serious problems. And like I think that the end solution. So the other point I want to make here, you're going to do this while you're cutting corporate tax rates. Okay. So you're going to throw poor people out of Medicaid so they don't have health insurance, kids, and you're going to cut tax rates for corporations that run all their shit through Ireland and don't pay their fair share of taxes to begin with. I mean, come on. That is just not going to fly. And so, so here's what I think will happen. Okay. I think they're going to go into the tax cut bill in the spring. It's a reconciliation process, which is a budget process that allows them to cut spending and taxes or raise or whatever. They can do one bill with certain caveats, and it can go through without a filibuster, right? So it goes through on a majority vote. It cannot touch appropriated spending. So that's all these departments that we're talking about. They have appropriations bills. There are certain cases where they could try to do it, but most likely they're not going to be able to touch appropriated spending. So that's going to have to go through regular appropriations over the years. So all this stuff like, hey, we're going to get rid of Department of Ed, blah, blah, blah. They're not going to be able to do that in reconciliation. Now, I think what they're probably going to do is take some amount of tariff increases, which again, the president can change, and probably cut some of this IRA money, like the solar tax credits. And I think solar stocks are way down. You see the evidence. So, but even there's substantial constituencies now. Even major oil companies are doing major solar projects. So I think you're probably going to see like it was a 10-year tax credit or tax window where they were providing tax credits to fund these solar projects. They'll probably, maybe they bring that down to 7, 6, maybe some of the top. There was ways you could get up to 70% tax credits. Maybe that comes down to 40 or 50 and they get some money out of that. And then, just their regular budget dance. And it'll still be a terribly, it'll be a terrible bill for the deficit. But I think what you're going to see is some combination of finding money that way. And then they're going to have to go into the appropriations process. And I think you're probably just going to see, restraint in spending, which is what we need, just don't increase it, but you're not going to see major cuts and reorganizations. I mean, the one chance they're going to have to do that is in the bills next October, for the end of this fiscal year. And I think even at that point, there are a lot of swing state Republicans, in a very narrow House. Plus, you have in the Senate, you have Susan Collins, Murkowski in Alaska, and then you've got several other moderates, like people in North Carolina and other states. And I just don't see them signing up for a major gutting of the federal government in appropriations bills for that year.
As you go into a midterm.
Right. And then, I don't know what Doge's level of effort's going to be and when they're going to put stuff out, but it's going to take them a while to figure out what's what. If they're planning to, they're supposed to wrap up by July 4th, 2026. If they're putting out a bunch of recommendations at that point and then hoping they'll get enacted, 5 months before a midterm election in which Republicans will probably be unpopular, I think that's delusional. I mean, they're not going to do anything. They're just going to let it sit. And given the Project 2025 popularity, I just don't see that being something they would want to run on.
And given the timing, so they chose that timing in July of 2026 because of the 250th, it'll be our 250th birthday anniversary, right?
Anniversary, right. I just suspect, there's already talk that Vivek Ramaswamy wants to run for governor in 2026 in Ohio. So, he's going to be gone within a few months. He's got to start going and fundraising and doing visits. And so you just wonder how long he can stay on this. Can Elon really stay on this for 2 years? And you're already hearing rumors that Trump's kind of getting tired of him. He's running around on this Treasury Secretary appointment and, maybe he's overstaying his welcome. So as I said in the article, I think Doge's ability to do anything is completely 100% based on Elon's relationship with Trump. I mean, outside of that, it doesn't really exist. It's just like I said in the article, I think Elon and Vivek could get together and create a Department of Government Efficiency, call it whatever they want, register a URL, hire people and look at government efficiency. And they could do that today. They didn't need Trump to do that. They could have done that a year ago. The only power it has is Trump's willingness to say, hey, OMB, hey, department, hey, congressional, negotiator on the budget, pay attention to, I want this thing that Doge said. So if that relationship fractures at all, or anybody, or Trump, quite frankly, I think he'll probably lose interest and see it as a loser, going in and cutting Pell Grants for poor kids to go to college. So, it just won't go anywhere. They'll just kill it. Right.
And it's not even, you went to a blue ribbon commission. It's not a blue ribbon commission either.
Right. Yeah. So normally, the Bowles-Simpson commission was that was chartered by Congress to come up with recommendations. And they went on, you get these former politicians, they get appropriated funds from the Congress and they go do all this research and then come back with this report. And with a blue ribbon commission, there's some expectation that Congress will take up that report and do something with it. And if you look exactly what happened with Bowles-Simpson, they came back with this report and nobody wanted to do it. Nobody was going to walk the plank to cut Medicare and Social Security in these programs and raise taxes, right? So it was during the Obama administration and there was they brought the report back and it was oh, are we going to vote on this? And then the whole thing just got buried, right? And they went into, I think that was probably for 2010, and the Republicans came in and slaughtered them in the midterms because that's what they knew. So why were they going to go walk the plank and do a bunch of unpopular stuff while they were in the minority, right? They weren't going to support that. They were just going to let Obama fail and win in the election, which is exactly what the Democrats are going to do this time around. I think when you look at it in this long term, I'm just what are we talking about here, people? We've seen this rodeo.
Right. Okay. I get now, there's a sector of the party who's run on a lot of these ideals for a while. But I mean, this is getting a lot of attention, Doge, just because it's the shiny object right now. And, Elon, is that what it is? I mean, because it's just not making sense.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's probably right. It's Elon, right? He's a meme machine. I think Trump was able to pull in a lot of these young men to vote for him. And amazingly, across every racial demographic group, on the male side, he really pumped up the numbers. So it was successful. RFK was part of that too, I think. And so, yeah, I think they're riding high and that they won. I think the realities of Washington are a lot harsher than they know, right? And I mean, granted, Elon went into Twitter and cut away and slept at his desk at Tesla and redid the factory, but he can't do that with the federal government. He doesn't control, I mean, the president doesn't control the federal government, right? So he's there at the sufferance of Trump. And as soon as it gets inconvenient, Trump will shuffle him off. Look, I think Elon, the other thing I said in the article is like he spent $200 million to get Trump elected. But pharma spends $326 million every year lobbying the government every year. So who's going to win in the long run? Like all these collected interests that have parts in each of these programs, you have narrow majorities, blah, blah, blah. Like, I think that's who's going to win. A one-time $200 million investment isn't going to get you a blank check. Good on him. Elon can try and let's see what happens. But like I said in the article, I don't think that government by meme is silly. I think it actually could have an impact. First of all, it can highlight a lot of issues, right? It can make something, you can use it to figure out what actually people vote for, we can cut. But I think it's going to have a hard time getting through these long-term bruising battles where, you go into the appropriations committees and you have narrow majorities and you're subject to the filibuster and all these different problems. It's going to have a hard time implementing some massive overhaul of the government. Like I said, let's see what the overhaul is supposed to be. I mean, if it's just one-off, like, hey, we don't like this program, I guess that could have some effect. But like, that's not a massive overhaul of the government. That's like, hey, we don't like the cops program at Justice or something. I don't know. Like, is that?
I'm holding my breath on a well thought out proposal of, all right, let's cut this. Let's work on this. Something that's just not like, let's get rid of this one. This sounds good.
Right. And actually, I saw Andy Kessler, the columnist for the Wall Street Journal, and he wrote exactly that article yesterday. It was ridiculous. I mean, this is the sort of nonsense that you're seeing. Look, he's a good writer. I think, I'm kind of shocked at what he wrote. I think he's being a little tongue in cheek, but it was just silly. And, he's like, hey, let's just whack all these departments, like the Federal Communications Commission, get rid of it, toss it. Securities and Exchange Commission, toss it because they missed Bernie Madoff. It's like, okay, so let's have unregulated stock markets. That seemed to work out well, right? Department of Agriculture, toss. Okay, what are you talking about? Like, first of all, agriculture does multiple different things, and most of red state senators are like highly invested in it, so you're not going to be able to do that. Squeeze the Department of Defense. It's just like, he said Postal Service, toss. Okay, I agree, but it's actually not an appropriated part of the government. It's self-funded. So like, we could get rid of the Postal Service, I think. But Department of Labor, union puppets, Transportation Department, its mileage and electrical vehicle mandates killed Detroit. So like, we're going to get rid of it? We're not going to have... It's just these sort of things. It's like, Veterans Affairs, can't they use the same hospitals as the rest of us? I mean, you want to go talk to veterans groups about that? Good luck. Like, they are going to kill you. It's just this sort of like, I feel like it's this arrogant attitude that everything sucks. We figured it out and nobody's thought of this stuff before. And it's like, come on, guys. And I'm really just disappointed in a lot of these finance and tech pros. I thought they would be smarter.
The only other thing that I was thinking is, and you've already touched on this, is that so much of this, it depends on the relationship, right, between Trump and Mr. Musk. And what are the chances that's not going to go a little south at some point? I mean, prime time.
Totally. Yeah, it kind of brings me to the other point. It's not like I'm sitting here saying, don't reform government. We definitely need to reform government. But quite frankly, I think hiring unqualified people to run departments and making crazy statements about getting rid of departments when you don't even know what they do is not the way to go about it. What would be great is if Elon turned Doge into a long-term effort to have like an interest group that really built the case for how do you reform government procurement? How do you take on NEPA? What needs to change? What in detail are you going to do? that could actually pass. Like, let's get something that can actually build, and then build a base of people in that organization that come out of government, that have experience, that know what they're doing. Create a cadre of people that can then go into subsequent administration and do the hard work for congressmen, work for senators, and do the hard work of changing the government. It is a long-term, multi-decade effort. This, like, I'm going to walk in with a chainsaw and do it in 5 seconds. Give me a break. Like, no. If you could, it would be a disaster. So do the work. That's what I'm trying to get, people to realize. Like, this is hard work, and we got to go do it. And we got to realize, like, also don't say everything is government reform. Like, slashing funding for some department is not government efficiency. It's just cutting spending, right? Going in and changing how we approach providing some service, or how we use the systems of government to be more technology driven, to be more data driven. That's government reform. And that's what we need. I just think we're going to waste a bunch of time. Like, in the end, we're going to cut some solar subsidies that we're going to get cut anyway. And like, this is all just end up being a big waste of time. I think there's a high probability.
A side circus act.
Yeah. I mean, you send Robert Kennedy into HHS to run around and do what? Like, the guy doesn't know what he's doing. What you need is somebody who's worked on these issues, who really understands government. There's got to be people outside who have worked in there, worked at FDA and worked at Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, and know how to get stuff done and what needs to change. Those are the people you need to bring in, right? Somebody who's done some of the work. I mean, they're just going to, Kennedy, RFK is going to go into this agency and sit there and get PowerPoint briefings for 24 months until he resigns, and not be able to do anything because they'll barely even know where the bathroom is. I mean, it's what I'm seeing is just so, look, the FCC guy, I think he was good. I think there are actually they're talking about Jay Bhattacharya from Stanford at NIH. Awesome. Here's somebody who knows the issues. Now, he doesn't have the bureaucratic experience, but he knows the scientific issues and pointed out very rightly what many of the problems in COVID were. That's the kind of person we want, not some bomb thrower who doesn't even know what they're doing. They're going to get worked, and the deep state is just going to work around them. And then you're going to go try to blow up the department, and you're going to have to get through the appropriations process, and you're not going to be able to do it. So then you've wasted a bunch of time, right? Or they're talking about like recess appointments, right? Which multiple conservative justices have started shrinking the recess appointment power. And if they go off and do this, it's possible that multiple departments, everything that they do from the time that that person is recess appointed to the ruling in the court, would be invalidated. So like, you'd have a mess of like actions taken by the government that everyone would be able to sue over, and we'd be like caught in court for like 10 years. I mean, I think we just needed the more deliberate process to reform government rather than just like throwing bombs around. It's just not, I don't think it's going to amount to much.
Yeah, at the very least, I mean, you make a good point.
So that's my take.
Yeah, you make a good point. At the very least, DOGE, if it could at least be something serious that brings forth a blueprint of how to do this, even if they don't actually come up with the solutions, but how to do it, right? What needs to be done. At the very least, that would be something, but I really don't have my hopes.
Yeah, I mean, I just think the problem is it requires a sustained effort. I don't think anybody involved is up for that challenge, right? Elon's got, I think Elon is going to do well with, maybe he can get a couple of people in government, but like, he's going to get Starlink and SpaceX and maybe get some regulatory reform at transportation that helps self-driving. He'll do well with that. And all that stuff's great. I love it. Go for it. I just worry that these big efforts that they're talking about are just going to run into walls, and like, nobody really cares that much anyway. And then there's a breakdown in the relationship with Trump. So then, it's not like they're going to hate each other, but it's just like, Elon's bothering me, get him, now he has to talk to the chief of staff, and then they just kind of put him in a box, right? So I'd just rather see like maybe more long-term commitments to sensibly going through this step by step, recruiting the people, getting the policies ready. And as I said, like, you've got to come in with your agenda ready to go. You can't spend 24 months figuring out what your agenda is going to be, because you're at midterms and you're losing, right? And all of a sudden, all you're going to do is respond to subpoenas from Democratic House of Representatives. And then there's going to be another, maybe they get the Senate if it's really bad. Probably not, but maybe. And then you got another impeachment hearing, right? So it's like, if we want to make change, what would be really great is to set up those with a long-term thing and then try for this. And it should be bipartisan, I think. I think plenty of Democrats want to say just government too. Let's get those ideas into the ecosystem along with people who can implement them. And then we could really do it. We could really do something. The meme stuff will help and it'll make differences here and there, but it feels like it's too ephemeral. It's like, hey, this is really bad. And then everybody pays attention to it for a month and then it goes away and there's something else, right? And so nobody ever does the work. And the finance and tech bros will have their day when they realize, oh, yeah, this is the way it really works. We actually have to focus on this long term if we want to change them. Hopefully they'll stay. But I feel like they're all just going to be like, I'm going to go make more money. So that's sort of what usually happens. But I'm a huge proponent. I would love it if tech people had sustained effort to influence government. And, that would be awesome. That would be really cool. But I just don't see them funding it and sticking with it. I had a piece on Bill Gurley doing that with, he made that speech at the All In Summit last year when I was there. And he had this whole speech about 3,000 whatever miles Silicon Valley is from Washington, D.C. And he's, whatever, I don't know, can't remember how many miles it is, but he said, and he goes through this whole thing about kind of corruption and influence peddling in DC and how terrible it's been and his experience with it. And then at the end, he's like, Silicon Valley is good because it's so freaking far away from DC. Just kind of like, DC sucks, get rid of it. And it's like, I get the emotion, right? I stood up and clapped with everybody else when he got a standing ovation. But actually, even before I stopped clapping, I was like, you know what? That feels great, but it doesn't do anything. The reality is government is the world's second oldest profession after prostitution, right? So as soon as people started being people, they started ruling themselves and having governments. So I don't think we're getting rid of government. And the reality is we have a country of 330 to 50 million people, depending on how many get deported over the next few months. And it's a very diverse country, right? And not as cohesive culturally as European countries that have, everybody looks the same and, is all from the same place. And so you have to have a government that processes and coalesces the interests of all these people, or else they're going to kill each other, right? So to be honest, having a government that spends 20% of GDP, it's like half of what they do in France or Britain and these other places, is not that bad. The burden isn't terrible. And it's frustrating. There's many things we need to do with it, but we have to recognize that there is no alternative to having a government. If it didn't exist, we'd have to invent it. People like Bill Gurley are the ones we need in doing the sustained work over time. Funding institutions, funding think tanks and recruitment machines that can get the right kind of people in and give them the policies that they need, and then funding the lobbying groups that will hold Congress to account. It is a difficult process, but throwing up your hands, I think the two reactions I'm seeing are, I'm going to take a chainsaw to it, or I'm going to throw up my hands and walk away. And it's like, neither of those are viable options. And they talk about Javier Milei in Argentina with the chainsaw. And it's like, first of all, Argentina is in a place far from anywhere the United States is. We are not in any crisis. Right. Argentina has been having declining standards of living compared to other countries for 100 years, right? That's a totally different situation than we're in. Second, they actually haven't changed as much as people think, right? There's some change, but, it's less than is made out to be. And no one knows if it's popular and whether it's going to work, right? So I think, you can point to one country that's in the midst of doing something a little more radical that has 100 years of, disappointing economic results. That is not a case to see the same thing happen in the United States, right? And then, so I just think as we've talked all throughout this thing, I think taking the chainsaw is not smart and won't happen, and there are better ways to do it. But then on the other hand, you can't just throw up your hands and walk away. So I'd love to see these guys take it more seriously and realize Bill Gurley is a billionaire. You got the money. The other day, and I'm not attacking him. He can do whatever he wants, private citizen. But, he's on a podcast with Brad Gerstner, another VC. Great podcast, by the way, B2G. And they were lamenting, I don't know, a few months ago that we never did a pandemic. We never looked back at the pandemic and figured out what went right and what went wrong. We never did one of those blue ribbon emissions, right? Which I'm still waiting for. And the reason we didn't is because both parties had stakes in the screw up. So neither has any incentive to show what they screwed up.
It hasn't been that long either.
Yeah, but it would be enough time now to have the UK just did an inquiry, right? I think we could do it. We should have done it. We still could. But why can't somebody like Bill Gurley get a bunch of tech guys together to fund something like that? Well, that's 15, $30 million bucks. That's nothing to a series and then bring in all the key experts. You can probably get them with all your connections, right? Get Mark Andreessen, get David Sachs, and get all these guys and fund something that could actually show here's what went wrong. Get Jay Bhattacharya to document it and put it in a report. And then that's what you go in and lobby Congress to we got to make these changes. And here are people that are key to making that change. And here's exactly what should happen. You walk in, you win the White House with that, you can get something done. That's what I want to see.
Yeah. If there was a way to harness all of that, how to harness all the money, all the expertise in a way that supports the government that we can't get rid of and that we don't want to necessarily, right?
Right. Exactly. And that's what I think is, in the end, going to be what has to happen for the tech bros and, a little bit less on the finance bros, but probably more the tech bros. That's what they're going to have to come to, or else they're going to have to walk away. And I think walking away is probably not an option for them because, I don't know, you saw what happened with AI in the last 4 years. I mean, there were 50 attempts to regulate it before we even knew what it was. So they're going to have to be involved. And they did, they got involved in this election cycle. I just hope that the takeaway from it isn't hey, we went in and then we got a couple of goodies. We killed the AI executive order. That all happened. But we're frustrated because we can't get bigger systemic change. The system won't let us. That's the point at which you got to double down and say, all right, we're going to build the infrastructure to create that change. And if they don't do it, I don't know who's going to.
It's big stuff.
Yeah. So that brings us to time, I think. It's enough big thoughts for the week. Maybe I'll write about that for next week, though, the building the systemic change.
There's a lot that you talk about. There's a lot to think about.
Yeah, I have a fear that it's not going to happen that way, but
it might not, but it's still, you could put the blueprint out there, Alan.
Well, I could put the blueprint for them to build the blueprint. There you go.
Right. Put the blueprint for them to do it.
Okay. You have an outdoor cat, it looks like, huh? Well, that's what he thinks about our podcast. So,
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Until next week.
All right. Good talking.
You've been listening to The New Rules with Alan Pentz. For more insights on mastering the new game, follow @Pentz, that's APENTZ, on X, and make sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss a single episode. Thanks for tuning in, and remember, in today's world, you don't follow the rules, you write them.